All right, joining me for this one is Ryan Reynolds. He is the special assistant to Sean Miller at Xavier. And Ryan, it's been pretty fun talking to some of these new assistant coaches because this is like a new world for them. Them coming to Cincinnati and getting to experience the city a little bit. It's been a completely new experience for some of these guys. But for you, that's not the case at all. You are a Cincinnati guy. This is your home. What has it been like after being away for 13 years, getting to come back to live in Cincinnati and work in Cincinnati again?
It's crazy. It's in this business, it very rarely goes full circle. Where you actually end up back at a place where you started. I went to Xavier as an undergrad. I got my master's degree from Xavier. So for it to be, I was out of the city for 14 years, like you said, and for it to go where I left, and when you leave in college basketball, you honestly never think you're ever going to go back. So you almost just accept the fact that you're gone from the city that I grew up in. And then for it to go completely full circle and for us to be back at Xavier, it's pretty incredible, to be honest. And it's a surreal feeling. And, like I've been saying for the last year and 3 or 4 months now, it's different, but it's still the same. Like I was here when it was the A10, and we were kind of building. And at this point, after being in the Big East for, I believe, 10 years now, all the changes that they've done to I'd say, just keep Cintas as an amazing on-campus arena. It's the same shell, but everything is just kind of souped up.
Yeah, definitely. Have you taken the rest of the guys to any certain spots that are your favorites to kind of show off the city a little bit?
I really was a big fan of Mount Adams at the end of my time.
It's changed, yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually it almost like doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
That's actually where my parents met at the pavilion. God knows when. Yeah. But it doesn't even exist anymore. So, the in and around Xavier, like I like Quatman's Cafe, and all the Cincinnati classics. I would say Skyline isn't necessarily for everybody. Either you love it or you hate it. I'm going to say David Miller, being a West Coaster, he doesn't really he's not a big Skyline guy. But another West Coaster, Ryan Anderson, he's all about it. So it's just kind of hit or miss. But it's great being back in the city.
Yeah, Skyline is always a tough one with the out-of-towners, but
right.
It's fun to see people that actually do like it, like Ryan Anderson. Your first 5 years at Xavier, right, that you were initially on the team, student manager initially, and then graduate assistant. Looking back at those years, I mean, you were involved in 2 of the school's 3 Elite 8 runs. It was probably about as good of a 5-year run as you could possibly be involved with Xavier basketball for. Do you have any go-to stories that you tell people about those years or those times?
It was so I grew up here in Cincinnati. I grew up a Kentucky fan. So at that point, it was because Kentucky was always on TV. I never really was a Bearcat, and I would have cheered for Xavier in the shootout, but at the time, Xavier wasn't on TV a lot when I was growing up. So I just kind of gravitated towards Kentucky. And then I decided that I wanted to try to get into college basketball. And at the time, Xavier, I missed Dave West by 1 year, but that was kind of when they took the big jump. They moved to Cintas. You had Dave West and Romain Sato and Lionel Chalmers and all those guys. So I was a freshman when Thad was in his last year at Xavier. I caught that first Elite 8 run. So like I kind of hit lightning in a bottle because it was I got there at the right time, and we went Elite 8, and then Sean took over. Had a little bit of a down year because we lost so much from the year before. And then we made the tournament. We lost to Gonzaga with Adam Morrison in Salt Lake City. The following year, we had beat BYU in the first round, lost in the infamous Ohio State Greg Oden game that everyone thought we had won. And lost that one, and that technically was my undergraduate, like senior year. And then the following year went to the Elite 8 and lost to UCLA, and like that was a really fun team. So yeah, I mean, I was really at the right place at the right time.
I have to imagine you go through that stretch with a program. It builds a lot of passion. I mean, I can sense it since you've been back that you care a lot about this place,
Yeah.
but I would imagine that stretch really built a love for Xavier's basketball program with you.
And those guys, like I came in with Justin Dolman and Justin Cage. So like I still, if I see those guys right now, I mean it's almost like we were just back in school living at the Commons. So like it's great seeing those guys: Stanley Burrell, Josh Duncan, uh, Brian Thornton. Are all guys that like I'm still in touch with today. Um, and it was just an excited time because at that point, basically every year we were right there to win the A10, either the regular season or the tournament. And our expectations were to make the tournament. And at that time, it was people were everyone kind of knew about Xavier, but our tournament success all kind of started right around at that point. So it was a fun time to be there.
You were mentioning how that was back in the A10 days, and obviously that was a very different time in Xavier history. What was your favorite and least favorite road trip in the A10 days?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
I would say the most fun place to go was at Dayton when we would win. It's a great atmosphere up there, and that I'd say for fans that are probably younger right now, they don't realize how much of a rivalry that was, especially because we played each other twice. But if you won at UD Arena, that was a incredible feeling when you could kind of hear that a stupid "Go Dayton Flyer" chant, and kind of walk out of the gym with a W. And it's a great atmosphere for college basketball up there. So it was just a really fun place to play. I would say my least favorite, it's probably a tie between going to Fordham and Rose Hill Gym, which is like at this point probably 125 years old. As a manager, like the locker room they would put us in was the football locker room. You had to go down a ton of steps. In the winter, it was cold as heck in there. In LaSalle. And LaSalle was tough because their gym was over a pool. So you could kind of smell the chlorine in the arena. And in the locker room, again, it was like 3 floors below the main gym. So as a manager, you're just going up and down steps the whole day with all of our stuff. So I'd have to put those two as my least favorite.
Yeah, from a logistical perspective, the LaSalle gym sounds like an absolute nightmare for you guys.
Yeah, it was not fun.
This is skipping ahead a little bit, but now that you're in the Big East, is there a favorite road trip in the Big East for you?
This past year, I haven't really been to a lot of these places until this year. It's especially compared to the Pac-12. It's a lot of big cities, and in the Pac-12, there are a few big cities, but there's also a lot of small college towns. So it's a little bit of a different feel. I mean, I enjoyed going to all the big cities. There's a few incredible home courts. Like I know we didn't play great in the game, but the Paul trip I like their new arena. The hotel that we stay at is real close to the arena.
It's like attached.
Yeah.
You literally just walk across. Yeah, it's great.
I mean, that's just as an ops guy, that's like a trip you dream of. But no, there's some incredible. I thought the game at UConn. I had played UConn at Arizona at Gamble or at the XL Center, and it was bonkers. I think that was Hurley's first year at UConn. But at Gamble, I'll tell you, it was really loud in there. And it was a game where we got up and then they went on a crazy run and we just kind of held them off. And in the middle of the crazy run, I mean, you could hardly hear yourself think. So there's just some great college basketball atmospheres in the Big East. It's obviously a college basketball conference at its best.
So we were talking about like your days as a manager and then a graduate assistant. what made you take this path into starting as
Yeah.
a manager and then deciding, hey, maybe I can parlay this into something more? Because a lot of people, it ends after those couple years as
Yeah.
manager and they move on to do something else.
So my dad is a 40-plus year high school coach. He coached here in Cincinnati, at Madeira for the longest time, about 25 years, and then he was at Wyoming and at Mount Healthy high schools before that. He actually continued to coach in Arizona, in Tucson. Actually coached Sean's youngest son, Braden, as a junior and senior, and helped him win a state title out there in Arizona. So that's kind of why I wanted to get into basketball. That was always kind of my path because of my dad. And when it kind of came down to colleges, I looked at Kentucky, I looked at Xavier, and I looked at Miami, Ohio. I wanted to be a manager because that was really my only path to at least make the effort to if I wanted to get into college basketball. If you're not going to play, I'd say really being a student manager is your only path. So I looked at Kentucky, and as you can imagine, they had 8,700 managers, and it's a whole different deal. I think I could have done it there, but it wasn't going to be the same. And then I visited Xavier, and my dad connected with, at the time, Bill Comar, who was the ops guy for Sean the first time he was the head coach, and he was the ops guy for Thad. And yeah, it just kind of worked out where there was a smaller group of managers. I knew we were going to be good. A lot of the managers that when I was a freshman were going to be seniors. So I kind of knew when I became a sophomore that I'd get a lot of responsibility. And one of the great things about Xavier is even though we're a smaller athletic department, it actually is great for the managers because at Xavier, we rely on the managers to do a lot of things. If you really think about it, on Sean's staff over the years, I mean, I was a manager for him. David Miller was a manager for him. Adam Cohen was a manager at Arizona for Coach Olson. On our step, Cam Miller, was a manager at Arizona. Mario was like a student assistant in his time at Xavier as an undergrad. I mean, and if you look at his other assistant coaches, Joe Pasternak, who's the head coach at Santa Barbara right now, was a student manager for Bobby Knight. So like it's just, he really trusts managers. And in large part it's because we rely on the managers to do a lot. So if you were me, and at the time I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into, but it ended up working out great just because at Xavier, our managers have a lot of responsibilities, and it kind of jump starts them into a career path with either in coaching on the college basketball staff, or there's a lot of guys that are equipment managers. The Ohio State football head equipment manager is a guy named Kevin Reese, and he was a student manager with me at Xavier. I think the guy for Syracuse is a former Xavier manager. The equipment manager at Arizona is an ex-Xavier manager, Brian Brigger. So it's a great jumping board for all managers at Xavier to kind of get into the college athletics world.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't feel like it necessarily works out that way with other head coaches in every program, that they are able to be empowered and move up through the ranks that way with the same head coach. Speaking of your job description now, I mean, you've moved up the ranks multiple times since those days. And looking back at what you were in charge of at Arizona, it seems like big construction projects, jersey stuff, scheduling, travel. I think a lot of people hear that from the Xavier side of things and think, wasn't that what Mario does at Xavier?
Yeah.
So how have you and Mario kind of split duties? Has your job changed much? Are you guys working on everything together? What's that like now?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough as a manager that, I got to learn under Mario and at the time Bill Comar, who is another longtime ops guy. And I would say those guys couldn't be, I'd say, more different in what they do and their strengths. So I was able to kind of pull the strengths off of both of them. And I mean, I looked at being a manager as like a 4-year internship, and I basically just learned and watched everything that those guys did. So, in my time in Arizona, I would say that in large part how Mario's been at Xavier, there was just kind of one of me. Um, and as time has kind of moved on in college athletics with NIL, and just all the other changing of landscapes, and it just started this July. You're allowed to have a few more assistant coaches on the floor. So a lot of the guys that had a director of player development or director of recruiting are guys that are more like coaches in waiting. And they kind of focus more on the basketball side of things than the ops guy, like on the ops side of it. So as those guys are now actually able to move more into a assistant coach's role, it takes the ops things that those guys were doing kind of away, and it's all falls on me and Mario. So having two of us is a huge deal. Up in the offices, we kind of share the same office, so it's easy for us to work off of each other, and kind of tag team everything. So I'd say really all of the ops stuff, when it comes to our game scheduling, our practice scheduling, academics, housing, financial aid, NIL, which is obviously a really big thing now. On-campus recruiting when we have kids that are on visits, our summer camps, just trying to manage Sean's schedule. It kind of falls on just both of us. It's great because Mario is incredible at doing things on the computer, when it comes to like graphics and like video and stuff like that. And I would say the most incredible thing about it is it's all self-taught. He didn't like go to school for that. He just kind of taught himself, which I am at a much lower level on the computer than he is. But like everything that I know, I watched him when I was a manager, and that's kind of how I learned. So it's a great deal having me and Mario, because I'd say most college basketball programs around the country, at first the ops guy was it was kind of a jumping board. Again, like if you want to be an assistant coach, that's kind of the route that you go.
Right.
And I'd say in the last 15 to 20 years, it's kind of more changed where the ops guys are kind of staying with the head coach, and you kind of become that guy's person, where I've been with Sean now in some capacity. I want to say it's 18 out of 19 years or 17 out of 18 years. And Mario was obviously with him the first time, and then this time. So I think there's just, as the head coach, they just like feeling comfortable with the people that are on their staff. And we don't really ask him a ton of questions. We just kind of know what he likes at this point, and try to keep it so we're moving, from one thing to the next thing, if it's our travel or our schedule. So, him and the assistant coaches can just focus on coaching and recruiting.
You were mentioning 18 out of 19 years being with Sean. I mean, at this point, I'm going to say this. I understand he has a son on the staff, but I'm going to say you probably know him better than anyone on this staff currently, given the amount of time you spent together as adults.
It's wild. Yeah. It's wild.
I mean, it really is. So I want to get back to some of the ops stuff that you do, but one of the questions when you first got here, when you guys first started playing games this year, that I kept getting is, who is the guy that Sean's always talking to on the bench sitting next to him?
Yeah.
What, you guys have this relationship that's so close. What types of conversations are you having during the game? Because it seems like you are the go-to guy on the bench that he's always saying something to.
Well, like that, I get that a lot. And I'd say as much as anything, I kind of keep a chart that is just kind of all the game scenarios, so, our foul situation, the other team's foul situation, how many timeouts do we have? How many timeouts do they have? How close are we to the bonus? How close is the other team to the bonus? All kind of stuff like that. And then he's always been really big on what he calls 4-minute wars. And that's, like the period of time between the media timeouts. Mm-hmm. And that's, every time we're actually in a timeout, that's always how he's going to start the timeout. Just in this war, in the last 4-minute war, we say we won 7-4. And he's going to talk about that. So I keep that. And then as the war is actually going on, a lot of the times he's asking me what the score is in the war. So like I'm just constantly updating him with that. So it's a lot of him kind of yelling at me to ask me questions, and then me giving the same answers over and over again, especially towards the end of the game where he's trying to think about the next play we're going to run, or if he's going to call timeout, and he may ask me how many timeouts we have 16 times in a row. And I'm giving the same answer each time, but if I say it 6 times, he may actually only hear me once.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That'll probably be the answer that gets the most response from this whole interview, because I know I've gotten that question many times. Like, what is he always asking him? And that was good stuff, good insight. And I mentioned you guys' relationship being so close. We've heard Sean talk a little bit about it. We've even heard his wife have some quotes about a change since he's taken some time away and come to Xavier. Have you sensed that? Do you see any differences in Sean Miller pre-Xavier second time around?
He's always evolving. Like the one thing that I'll say about Sean as a coach is I've never seen anybody that he kind of has this reputation of being like a great recruiting, like he's an unbelievable recruiter. And I don't want to say that that's not true, but he's incredible with X's and O's. And like on the practice court, on the skill workout that's in the month of April, like that's what he lives for. He's the son of a high school coach that he kind of grew up in that whole world, almost the same world that I grew up in. But like he's always been that guy. And the how amazing he is, like how fast he can pick things up. When it comes to the game is just I've never been around anybody like that. And then, I think just as he gets older, his kids are now out of school. I think it just kind of changes you. Our offense has continued to evolve from our time at Arizona to here. And I think, our offense, how we played last year, it's a really fun style that I think a lot of kids that's what they're excited about playing, going up and down. That's probably the biggest change from Arizona to Xavier this time is just, his ability to adapt and change how we play, which it's hard for some coaches to kind of let go. And I think in the year that he was out, he really did a deep dive on just how he wanted to play. And this is kind of what we came up with, which in year one I think we led the entire NCAA in assists per game. It worked. And our team really fit the offense, so I think that helped as well. But he really studied the game in the year that he was away. And then on top of everything else, he's always had just a huge soft spot and appreciation and love for Xavier. So I think him being back, at a place that is so basketball centric, it just kind of was the perfect combination.
I don't want to take up too much of your time because I told you we're about at the time limit that I gave you originally. Do you have a couple more minutes for scheduling and some other things real quick? Sure. Were you guys happy with the way the non-conference schedule came together this year? You just released it this past week. Did that turn out as you were hoping?
I think you're always kind of looking for balance. Like if you hear Sean talk about the Big East, he talks a lot about how it's a full 20 game round robin now with UConn being in, just it is after going through it 1 year, it is just a total monster. All of the road games, I'd say for the most part have unbelievable crowds. And even if you're playing a team that may not be having a great year, you have to be at your best to win that game. And not every conference is like that. So I think that is probably one of the things about the Big East where, if you're going to play 31 games in the regular season, you got 20 monsters, that are just already sitting there in the Big East. And then you throw in, obviously the shootout is always a big game. It doesn't matter how good or bad either team is. It's going to be a war. And then you have the Gavitt games that is always with the Big Ten. And then you have the Big 12 challenge, which, at Arizona, we didn't have those challenges. And I was always hungry to have those because it kind of made it easier on not having to schedule the teams. But at the same point, when they throw at Purdue at you, I don't know if I feel as good about it because that's obviously a monster game.
Yes.
But it's just kind of sitting there, and then you just kind of plan around it. So you're trying to have some balance of our team's going to be young with a lot of new guys, and then our philosophy with the MTEs are, I'd say for the most part, after they changed a few of the scheduling rules, is kind of leaning towards more of the 2-game neutral events. Because if you're going to play those with the other stuff on our schedule, if you're playing 25 games against high major Power 6 conference teams, and like if you think about our MTE this year, you have a Pac-12 team in Washington, and then San Diego State and St. Mary's at Arizona. We played against them a lot, so I know exactly who those programs are. And even though they may not be in a Power 6 conference, I mean, obviously San Diego State was just in the national championship game. St. Mary's is a perennial top 25 team. I mean, that's a heck of a field. So our 25 games against high major teams, I mean, it's as good as our schedule was last year, almost, in my opinion. There's an extra guarantee game this year, but I mean, you have to have some balance, and I think our schedule is exactly what Sean's kind of looking for.
I know when I talked to Mario, this was actually on Selection Sunday last year. We did a live show, and he hopped on for a few minutes. And one of the things he talked about was with the net, it's very challenging to schedule because there just aren't enough data points yet to know exactly what the committee's looking for. It with the RPI, you had 20 years worth of data to say, okay, if you had this strength of schedule and this record and whatever, you would be a tournament team. And with the net, there just hasn't been that year yet because you have COVID years, multiple of them that screwed things up, and it's just not there. Are you starting to feel like you have a little more insight or a little bit more to go off of, or is it still pretty much just like anyone's guess?
I think there's more and more insight coming. I think the biggest thing, and it's the way I think the net is still able to be manipulated right now. They have tried to kind of, I'd say, control that a little bit. But the efficiency part of the net on offensive and defensive efficiency is one of the things where, like, if you play a game and if you have the chance to win by 25, you better win by 25 because it sounds crazy, but like it helps your net, 8 to 10 spots. So if you can get those big wins, if they're against a guaranteed type of a team, it still helps a lot. If you can get one of them against a team that's good, like if I use UConn as the example last year, that the whole year they were kind of stuck in that top 5 of the net, and it's because when they went to PK 85, they played Alabama and they beat them by like 30.
Right.
And then I think they played Oregon and they won by like 20. And then they beat Iowa State maybe, and I think they won by like 15. If you have like a few neutral wins like that against high-level teams where efficiency-wise you just kind of dominated the game, that's just a really, really big deal. Like I think if you look on our schedule last year, when we beat, I want to say either Seton Hall or no, I think it would have been St. John's at home. And we just kind of ran away with the game. And I think we won by, a solid margin. It helped our net just at such a huge level on the next day. So It's hard to really manipulate it. It really comes down to, like, it sounds basic, but you just have to win the games. Like, obviously the more games you win, the better. But I think the biggest thing that we've learned is if you have the ability to win by 20, win by 20. If you're gonna put at the end of the game, it's a disaster. If you sub a lot and the other team is still pressing, um, and it's like instead of winning by 20, you end up winning by 8,
Right.
and you still win the game and you still won it comfortably, but it affects your net. So, like, I think that's what the teams have kind of figured out, and until they kind of address that change with efficiency, I think they kind of help the scoring margin part of it, but efficiency is still the one thing that can manipulate it.
Do you have a white whale from a scheduling standpoint, whether that be event, team, location, something out there that you've always wanted to play in?
I'd say I've been lucky to play in a lot of things. I would say, as far as like a tournament or like a neutral site game, not really. Um, as far as like a home and home goes, I've never played at Kansas, and I would say I don't know if I want to experience it or not, because it doesn't go well for most people that go there.
Yeah, as a basketball fan, maybe, but
Yeah,
maybe not
yeah,
as a competitor.
that's like I've been just about everywhere else. But like I'd say, as far as like MTEs go, like I've been to Maui 3 or 4 times, and it's a really fun tournament to go to if you have a good team. If you don't have a good team, or if you're just okay with how those fields are, it can really go from a fun time to not a fun time very quickly. So I'd say at the end of the day too, like, our home court is so incredible that you know, if I'm being selfish, the more that we can play at Cintas, um, it's better for everybody. Like, I want our fans to be able to see big games. Like, I know if teams come into Cintas, uh, not everyone completely understands how great of a home court it is, and they can kind of catch some teams off guard. Um, but I can't say that there's like a dream tournament. At the end of the day, my dream is, like, at the end of the season, I want to be at the Final Four.
Right.
That's
Sure.
I'm sure that's what everybody would say. And unfortunately, as a manager and as like a full-time staff member, I'm 0-5 in the Elite Eight, which is like a nightmare round for me. So at some point we're gonna actually break down that wall, but the ultimate goal would obviously to be in the Final Four and play in that football stadium where there's 100,000 people watching you, and only about 10,000 of those seats you can actually see the floor.
Are there any changes coming for this year's jerseys that fans can be expecting, or is there a big overhaul coming in the next couple of years?
That's more Mario's department. He's a
Okay.
lot more stylish than I am.
Okay.
I think for this upcoming year, it'll probably be pretty similar. And I'd say beyond that, I don't know if we've really gotten that far, but our uniforms for this year, I think, will be pretty much the same. Like, the one change I'm sure everyone saw is you're allowed to wear 6, 7, 8, and 9. And on this upcoming year, Quincy Oliveira is going to wear number 8, so he's going to be kind of our first guy to take advantage of that rule. And I would say a little known fact of that rule is Mario is actually the one that proposed it to the NCAA.
Really?
So I personally call it the Mario Mercurio rule.
Well, now we will too, obviously.
Yeah. So I think he had actually tried to do it a few years before COVID. And then he proposed it again this past spring, and it actually got accepted.
Was that about opening up more numbers to be used in case you want to retire certain numbers?
Yeah. So at Xavier, obviously when we retired the 4 jerseys that we have retired, it's not just retiring the jersey, you're retiring the number.
Yeah.
And there's just not a lot of numbers left if you can only wear 0 through 5.
Yeah.
At Arizona, there was a bunch of retired jerseys, but they didn't retire the number, which is cool, but also it kind of takes away the effect of not letting somebody wear, the actual number that's hanging in the rafters.
Right.
So I think that was kind of Mario's intent, and obviously it opens up a lot more numbers. And really, when you think about it, in the NBA, you can wear whatever number you want. In international basketball, you can wear whatever you want. So I don't know, for whatever reason, high school basketball in the States and then college basketball in the States is kind of the last place where they had the 0 through 5 rule. So it's cool to see that go away, because I think it'll just open up some interesting numbers. I think 8 is going to be a hot number just because of Kobe, and I think 6 will be a hot number too. But it'll be fun to see that, and everyone should refer to that as the Mercurio rule.
I mean, will we be seeing, like, you guys aren't going to let someone wear 88 or anything, are you?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess if they want to, they can.
Legally?
I
know Mario well enough to know he's not letting anyone wear something stupid.
There's a few numbers out there for sure that I'm sure I'll block. But like at the end of the day, if a kid really wants to wear a specific number, like in the world of like recruiting, that's an easy way we can make somebody happy and say, if you want to wear that number, you can wear that number.
Sure.
So I don't think a lot of kids really grow up dreaming of wearing 6, 7, 8, 9 or 18 or 19. But I mean, you never know. I mean, at this point, you got a guy like Luka wearing 77.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Good call.
So it happens. It happens more than you think, especially when you watch like the Dream Team or like the international games where they wear like 1 through 15. So, but no, it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
All right, we'll wrap it up with this because we're way over the time I asked you for. Do you have a personal favorite Xavier jersey?
So I really am a fan of the jerseys that we wore with Dave West, and then I would say we wore those.
Are those the Reeboks with the
no
X's going around it?
It was the original Nike jersey. So
okay, with the sort of bigger, like
cutoffs. So it had the big script Xavier on the front. Had kind of the white panel down the side that had like the navy line going through it, and the X on the shorts. It would be like if you look at that 04 Elite 8 run, that was the jersey that we were wearing then. It actually originally I think was a Kentucky uniform. It was kind of the Kentucky uniform they wore when they had Keith Bogans and all those guys, and then we kind of adopted it as the Xavier uniform. But it was the original time at Nike where we were going black, navy, and white. I just think it's a really clean look, and I'm a huge fan of just the X logo. I'm cool with the Musketeer head, and that's fine. But in the time when I was a student, I mean, the X was really the only logo that we rolled with, and we're as the only X school in college athletics. Like, I love just riding that X out.
Same. It's so recognizable, and I think that's so big from a branding perspective that it's really unique. Well, Ryan, this was awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. There's a million other things I could ask you about, but we'll save it for another podcast. Appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day and joining us.
That sounds good, Rick. Thanks for having me.
All right. He is Ryan Reynolds, special assistant to Sean Miller at Xavier.